Welcome back to the Press Club. We're shifting focus. Let's look at the Mirror newspaper's top story. Shastney vindicated. Judge dismisses, I suspect that should be dismisses, government case against him, referring to case leveled at the leader of the opposition, former government minister, former tourism minister.
Leader of the United Workers' Party.
United Workers' Party, sorry. For misuse, alleged misuse of, I think, over $38,000, just over $38,000, $38,119 of public funds for the unlawful purpose of campaigning and a political event for his personal and political benefit or the benefit of his political party. The ruling was that the case had no ground or basis, that the Attorney General, as Mr. Shastney and his lawyer had been arguing from the outset, were not qualified to lodge the case against him. At the beginning of the program, you expressed some issues with the judgment.
No, I didn't have an issue with the judgment. I can't have an issue with a judge, judge's judgment in a court. My issue is with the coverage, the way in which the story has been covered. Obviously, reporters did not go to the courthouse to cover the case, but merely covered it from the standpoint of a press conference called by Mr. Shastney and his lawyer.
You raise an interesting point there. Reporters didn't go to the courthouse to cover stories. I remember when I started, when any reporter started, that was how you learned.
That's how you
court
learned
and parliament.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not happening
No,
these
but
days.
press conferences and telephones and internet makes it easier now. So all of the reports, I've read them all of the press reports are quoting Mr. Shastney and his lawyer as saying that he has been vindicated. So the word vindicated, Shastney vindicated, on the front page of the Mirror, I do not expect anything else, bearing in mind where the Mirror stands in the whole politics of St. Lucia. But let's not go there. I'm dealing with the way in which the story was covered and the fact that what we are being fed as a news item is the interpretation, the selfish interpretation of an involved party. What's a court case? A case carried against one entity by another. What is a ruling? The judge decides on the basis of the evidence before him or her. In this particular case, you have a class action. It's not a normal court case. It's a class action case in which Mr. Shastney has many cases being heard at the same time. And in one of those cases, the judge takes a decision pending other decisions on other cases relating to the same gentleman. Now, the lawyer, when you listen to what Mr. Shastney's lawyer says, he says, the judge has vindicated my client. The judge's judgment has vindicated my client. Mr. Shastney says, I feel vindicated because my reputation needs to be protected, etc., etc. The question here now, that the journalist who is going to be informing the public needs to understand is, are we going to report what Mr. Shastney said? In which case, if that is what we would do, the headline ought to be, Mr. Shastney says he feels vindicated. Right? Vindicated. What is the meaning of vindicated? Vindicated means you were accused of something and you have now been proven not guilty. The judge's judgment and ruling in this case does not say that Mr. Shastney is not guilty. It does not say that money was not spent. Does not say that money from the town council was not spent as alleged by the government. What the judgment says is that the Attorney General was the wrong person to complain, because the money, in the judge's view, belonged to the Suffret Town Council and not the government of St. Lucia. And therefore, as indicated in his ruling, that the Suffret Town Council, he used the word, would have been the natural victim And therefore, it is the natural victim, the owner of the money, the Soufriere Town Council, who ought to have filed the case, and not the central government in Castries. What the press has not reported, and I'm not sure if the...
Which is, he actually says in the story, Chasney, that is, Chasney explained to the media that the funds put into the town council belongs to the town council. And the claims by the government that it was illegal and the money had to go into the consolidated fund are untrue. So he says exactly what you're saying.
No, he says what he says. I'm not sure that what Mr. Chasney says is what the government is saying, because when I listened to the government's lawyer, Anthony Astefan, reacting to Mr. Chasney's lawyer's claim that his client is vindicated, and that was one QC reacting to the words of another QC over the same case, and they're on different sides. Mr. Astefan said, and I heard him, he said, listen, the judge got it wrong, because what he doesn't understand is that in the St. Lucia case, the Soufriere Town Council is part of the government, and that the funds, and that the funds that the council has, however it uses it, those funds were given for it to undertake work in the public interest as part of government's policy. And we also have to remember, I'm not sure if the judge knows that or is aware of the implications of that for the case, that town and that local government councils are appointed by government. We haven't had local government elections since 1980. So whether it is the government of the UWP or the government of the SLP, in the case when the Soufriere Town Council gave that money to Mr. Chasney, it was a Soufriere Town Council appointed by a UWP administration. Now, what hasn't been said there is that Mr. Chasney always said from day one that it was not the town council's money, but it was money donated by friends of Soufriere. Now, I haven't heard, and no journalist has tried to find out who were the friends of Soufriere. And did the friends of Soufriere give that money to Mr. Chasney, or did the friends of Soufriere don't give that money to the council? And what the court would have to decide is, if the friends of Soufriere can be identified, and if it can be proven that any friends of Soufriere gave $38,444, that's the figure I have, to Mr. Chasney's campaign, what the court would have to decide is whether money from the so-called Friends of Soufriere, the invisible Friends of Soufriere, deposited in Soufriere Town Council's account, whether that still remains money belonging to Friends of Soufriere that have been given a ride or a parking lot in the Soufriere Town Council's account to be transferred to Mr. Chasney, and whether that would be legal. So the charges brought against Mr. Chasney are not about him stealing money. You read the charges, and maybe our fellows don't understand. Misfeasance in public office. What they're saying is that he should have known better. You know, he should have known better. And I think that that is the thing. So if Mr. Chasney, to put it down to normal terms, if he wins on the basis of a technicality, it doesn't mean that he is not guilty. In fact, one guy pointed out to me, he said, listen, and it's an unfair comparison, but he said the cathedral murderers committed murder, you know, and they are known to have committed murder, but they were not sentenced to hang, and in effect they have got a tap on the wrist. But it doesn't mean that because they were not hung, that they did not commit murder. So they won. Their necks were saved on the basis of a technicality, having been kept for more than 5 years before being sentenced. So in the case of Mr. Chasney, I'll simply say he hasn't been vindicated. The word vindication is being posted in red on the front page of the Mirror, but you know, that's in my interpretation, that should be seen as a red flag.
Let's look at the Star newspaper before we run out of time.
Yeah, we have a way of running out of time.
Yeah, Lambert's explores. The hour runs by very quickly. The Lambert story is not going away anytime soon. Rick Wayne has latched onto it for a long time. I think some of the other media houses have suffered from the short-term memory that we spoke about earlier and have dropped the story altogether. On Thursday night, he had another
episode.
But an Indian guest. He did a separate interview which was broadcast during his show.
When you say Indian, as from India?
As from India, who claims that the Lambert story, contrary to what has been reported in some of the media as the first case of human trafficking in St. Lucia, is not so. He's saying that he was part of a group of Indians who were themselves victims of human trafficking right here in St. Lucia, who responded to an ad, and that story is also carried in the Mirror newspaper. The Voice editorial is on it as well. Responded to an ad to come here to study medicine. When they got here to the institution, they found that nothing resembling School of Medicine existed. They were basically held as prisoners, told where to go, who they could speak with, when to eat, what to eat, and in some instances were beaten, brutally beaten. Reports to the police and the Labor Department and other government agencies yielded them no positive results. Also, we have the headline story in the Star reacting to the statement by Invest St. Lucia, which the Star carries in its entirety. And Rick Wayne goes on in his article, what didn't McHale Andrew know about Lambert's before police charged operators with human trafficking? You were saying, or you are saying that, well, I'm paraphrasing here, the story doesn't have any substance because it's just a response to the statement, and there's no journalistic investigation or new revelations being made. But I think some of the issues raised in it are still require responses.
Oh yeah.
You know, everybody's saying we follow due diligence. Obviously, the existence of Lambert's and this case that's being pursued in court now suggests to us that our due diligence needs to be reviewed, especially if we're going to look at investment, citizenship by investment programs. We need to tighten up on some of these loopholes. Never mind that. Quite apart from that, Lambert's has raised its head and focused attention on the subject of human trafficking. We have this other issue now coming up where this guy is saying, you know, Lambert's isn't just it. It goes deeper. There's been pre-existing cases. What investigations are being done now to look into those cases and those institutions, which you touched on, I think, the last time we were here? You know, are we following up once these people set up shop here to ensure that due diligence is in fact working?
I'll start off in my usual way. I've long wondered when Invest St. Lucia would say something, you know, and this picture of the Invest St. Lucia CEO is normally used in other places in one ad to say that, you know, investment never looked better in St. Lucia. And of course, the Star's selection of the inside photo is not a very nice picture of investment in St. Lucia. Having said this, I think that the Lambert story is vindicating something that I have been saying all along, the latest Van Lambert's story. And that is that Lambert's was not and is not the first case. I always go back to Crime Chief Frances Henry's disclosure at her first press conference on 28th of February, with that in her investigations, they also found many other places where so-called students are being kept under controlled circumstances. I always felt that she was not talking about Lambert's alone. But since Lambert's, the 4 Lambert's guys had just been arrested, every colleague I spoke to who attended that press conference mistakenly interpreted it that she was saying that
French
Lamberts is spread all over the area. She did in fact say that there had been a previous case a year before that had been through the court system. She didn't say how it ended.
As a matter of fact, this story that Rick Wayne broke on his show suggests, and the Voice editorial points to it, that somebody involved in the Lambert scandal was involved in this other
yes, Dr. Shams. Yeah, in fact, it's basically saying that he tried coming in under one guise, failed, and came back under another guise through an easier gateway. And this is where, again, I want to appeal to our sense of being able to look at Lamberts as not just a Tibutic case, you know, of clothes being stolen off a line, or a house being broken into. It's a big story.
Yeah, but let's take a break. We're due for one, and then we can come back and we can round up.
At least we have one more.
Yeah, because we quickly run out of time.
One more wrong.
Yeah, the Press Club will be right back.